जय जय बलदेव जय जय बलदेव
Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe
Radhe Radhe Govinda Govinda Radhe Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Jai Jai Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Guru Premanande
Will be there maybe in next 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
I'll call one.
No, just Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane
Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavati Astutyadi Savarane
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatari Shatarine
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara There's, I don't know how many people get these emails about every day about Srila Prabhupada. Which one is it? Just two.
Maharaj will be coming in 10 minutes. For the day.
Anyway, I just want to mention something. Srila Prabhupada today, they're really good. Get these. But there's a famous picture of Srila Prabhupada sitting in a vehicle with a huge smile. Like it's like the biggest smile you ever seen on Prabhupada. And then in this it told why he was smiling so much. So besides those who have read it, I mean, I don't think anybody will be able to guess, but you may be able to get close. Anybody have any idea why he was smiling so much? I'll give a hint. He asked someone to do something, and then they agreed to do it.
Is guessing allowed?
You read it? You get it every day. Read it though.
I did not read.
No, it wasn't today.
Yeah,
A few days ago. You can guess.
He asked someone to chant 16 rounds and someone agreed.
No. Yeah, he'd be smiling like that all the time. That's the case. Actually, it's. I never knew this guy, but I've seen the picture before. But this is the first time I learned about it. Was he went to Russia. Everyone knows Prabhupada went to Russia, and when he went, he met one boy, and he preached to this boy for like 2 or 3 days, practically constantly, and then he initiated him. And this is just one person to try to spread Krishna consciousness in Russia. So he asked one brahmacharini. How many people have heard the word brahmacharini? How many people have not heard the word brahmacharini? Okay. You've heard of brahmachari, right? So when Prabhupada came, and the woman also wanted to live in the temple and do the same thing that the brahmacharis did. So he, had separate quarters for the woman, and he called them brahmacharinis. So anyway, he asked one of the brahmacharinis to go to Russia, marry this devotee, and teach him about Krishna consciousness. And she agreed to do that, and that's why Prabhupada was smiling so much, because he's seen in Russia, they needs Krishna consciousness. So, he's. I mean, I'm not giving the talk. I'm just filling in the time here. But his whole consciousness was how everyone here who is thinking they're happy, everyone is just an illusion. There's no real happiness here. And the only real happiness is Krishna consciousness. You can be happy here, and you can be happy after you leave this world. Then you can be happy because you can go back home, back to Godhead. So his whole mission, he wasn't just an ordinary guru or even an ordinary acharya. His mission was to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. No one has ever done anything like that. The most anyone really did is in India, or Prabhupada's guru sent people to England, London, and they tried and did not succeed. In Germany, they made 1 or 2 disciples. And I heard even Indonesia, that he sent people to Indonesia. Recently I read that. But he seen Russia is so big, how are we going to get it? And you can't do anything there. It's totally illegal, So he went, and they took some pictures. Actually, he bought who was it, Shamasundar? Shamasundar bought a camera with some film before he left from India. It's the only film he can get, like one, I think it was black and white too, film. And he said, because we're going to Russia, I want to take some pictures. So that's the only reason we have pictures of him in Russia. But he was so happy because now there was some way that Russia can also become devotees. And now so many thousands of devotees are in Russia. Of course, it was from those two, and then also other devotees went undercover. Even Niranjana Swami, he would go regularly undercover. In other words, he'd have to sign up. You couldn't just go and do anything you want. You have to sign up, you have to belong to a tour group, you have to stay at a hotel. And he would always just leave. And then people would ask, where'd you go? You know, and so he'd go because they had houses of devotees, and it was all secretive. Now it's not secretive, but it was in the beginning. But Prabhupada was just so overjoyed, extreme happiness when this devotee, this woman, agreed to marry this man she never met and teach him about Krishna consciousness and spread Krishna consciousness in Russia. So if you ever see that picture of him in the car, that's what it is. Want to say something? Jiva?
Why can't you look at him? Oh, just that shows or illustrates how surrendered the devotees were to Prabhupada.
Right, devotees would do anything, Prabhupada said. Marry this person, yeah, no question. I mean, people do that, you know, with lots of times, maybe not even as much anymore, but in India, your parents would tell you to marry. Like Srila Prabhupada, he wanted to marry this one woman, but Prabhupada's father said, no, marry this other woman. He wasn't attracted to her at all, but he did it because his father told him to. How many people here, their marriage was arranged by their parents? Oh wow, a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wow, very good. Our marriage was arranged but by our GBC, ISKCON Maharaj at the time. He arranged our marriage. I never saw her, didn't know what she looked like. I wasn't so eager to agree to it. I actually wanted to see what she looked like before I agreed. So I went to Long Island, and then there was about 7 different women there, and I didn't know which one it was, but I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did it, and I'm so happy. So we did, for Prabhupada, devotees would really do anything without, you know, devotees wanted eagerly for Prabhupada to tell them to some specific instruction what he wanted, but he hardly ever did. When people would ask him, "What, Srila Prabhupada, how can I serve you?" he'd say, "Chant Hare Krishna." Naman is serving Prabhupada so nicely. He's always chanting Hare Krishna. He can play a better tune sometimes, but Bhakti Siddhanta would sometimes pick this one devotee to lead kirtan who couldn't lead kirtan very well. He wasn't very musically inclined, but he was very sincere. And Bhakti Siddhanta Prabhupada just listened to his chanting and just appreciated it because he was chanting so sincerely. So we may not have some material ability. That's not any impediment in spiritual life. There's no material impediment in spiritual life. You can say, oh, I lost my job, oh this, oh that, so many things. My wife left me, my husband left me. You know, it doesn't matter. Everything, Prabhupada said, everything can be advantageous for surrendering to Krishna. Even Srila Prabhupada, he didn't do very good in his work, and he did good in his work, but his business wasn't doing very well. And then he wound up giving up his business. His wife was not very happy, and so many problems. And he said when you don't have money, then nobody likes you anymore. It's like, so. But then later he read that when Krishna really cares for you, he takes everything away, and then you have no choice but to surrender to him. So he saw it later on that it's Krishna's arrangement that all this happened, because now I have to surrender to Krishna. So fortunately, he doesn't like us that much.
It will take time for them to understand.
He's not going to do more than we can actually accept. He's not going to give us a test that's impossible for us to pass. Impossible. Bhakti Siddhanta said, tolerate. You have to tolerate. He says, even if it becomes intolerable, still you should tolerate. It's like the meaning of intolerable means you can't do it, but still you should tolerate. And Prabhupada said impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. Nothing's impossible. You can see what Prabhupada did. And it's not just Prabhupada, his disciples did so many wonderful, amazing things. Especially when Prabhupada was here, but even after Prabhupada. But when Prabhupada was here, devotees did such amazing. They was just so surrendered. If one is surrendered to Krishna, anything can happen. Anything. Do so many books, so much. It was like I say it as Prabhupada wanted to please Krishna. That's all he wanted, and to please his guru, actually. That's all he wanted to do. Pleasing his guru is pleasing Krishna. And Krishna wanted to please Prabhupada because he's completely given it. So what can he give him? He can't give him, he's not interested in material things, but he gave him people. Prabhupada said, my Guru Maharaj, he has sent you. He has sent all of you to help me push on this movement. So he was seeing that. So Krishna did find some people who had some sincerity, even though they had no other qualification, and sent them to Prabhupada, and then they became empowered to do so much for Prabhupada. It's really a miracle. I read a book once about this before I became a devotee, about how the whole world is collapsing and all these great personalities were leaving, disappeared. And then they were trying to get this one person. Anyway, they got this one person who at the end finally surrendered. And they went to this valley that was kind of hidden. You couldn't. And all these great personalities were there. And they had a perfect society, and everything was so wonderful. And it was a good book, a famous book. But when I became a devotee and saw what Prabhupada did, was so much greater, because he didn't take the great personalities in this world that were so successful materially and were able to accomplish so much. He took people who weren't doing much of anything and made them do so much, and made a perfect society. I mean, the society that Srila Prabhupada has established is perfect. There's people in it who are not perfect, but if we cooperate. He also said when he was leaving his body on his deathbed, you'll show your love for me by how you cooperate with each other. That's how we show our love to Prabhupada, that we cooperate with each other. We disagree, everybody disagrees on some things, but you cooperate. So cooperation means, okay, we'll do it your way. That's cooperation. But no, I got a better way, I'm not doing it your way. That's not cooperation. So we have to cooperate. I mean, Srila Prabhupada should be the center of this movement, the founder Acharya. Everyone has a relationship with him, and we should hear more about him, read about him. Anyone here read the book Miracle on 2nd Avenue? And me. It's a really good book. I don't know if we have it at the store or not, but you should get a copy and read it. When you read things, like, you can see who Prabhupada was. Helps you develop your love and your faith in Prabhupada. Any questions?
That's the book you were talking about? The stories about the different personalities?
What?
Stories about different personalities.
Is that the book you're talking about?
No.
Oh, that's a different person.
That book he read before coming to Krishna.
It's actually written by an atheist. I later on found out it's a woman atheist. But at the time, I thought it was pretty nice. And I didn't read that many books, fortunately. You call me books, we should read Prabhupada's books. Okay, so, chant. Anybody want to chant? Any questions? How many people here have ever had a dream and Srila Prabhupada was in your dream? One. Well, you did, I'm sure, right? I did. Nobody else? No one else had dreams of Prabhupada?
My wife had.
Your wife had? Well, you get some credit. Yeah, if you hear more about Prabhupada, then you may have dreams of Prabhupada. Prabhupada said when you dream of Krishna or the spiritual master, that's real. But otherwise, if you just dream anything else, it's just an illusion. We don't pay too much attention to dreams, trying to figure them out. What does it mean? Prabhupada gave the example, like you see gold and you see a mountain, and then in your dream you dream of a golden mountain. It's like it puts things together that you've seen. But sometimes we actually have some spiritual... I'll tell you a story about a friend of mine. This is a Westerner, a devotee. He was in New York. He did a lot of service, but he wasn't so, like, he pretty much never went to Mangal Arati. He's just kind of by himself mostly, and he did a lot of I don't know if I don't even know if I should film this if I'm telling this story, but I'll tell it anyway. Anyway, he's dreaming. And he's dreaming, and there was a beautiful woman in his dream. And then there was Prabhupada. And he's looked at, he's seen Prabhupada, and he's seen this woman. And he's seen a very attractive woman. He's seen Prabhupada. And then he went to Prabhupada. And then at that time, he woke up. And it was just before Mangal Arati. He got up, he ran, he took a shower. And he was thinking, he told me this confidentially. I'm just finishing one dream of somebody that some devotee had. I'm telling. But anyway, so he went to Mangal Arati. Normally when he goes to Mangal Arati, he just stands on the side, looks a little at the deities, but this time he picked a pair of car towels and he went right in the middle of the kirtan. This is in 55th Street, so there was always big, huge kirtans in New York. And he's there and he's thinking, I've given up sex desire. I've given up sex desire, because he had the choice there, and he took Prabhupada, and he's so happy. And then while he's chanting, he noticed he's looking at the woman, and then he went back and he's chanting, and then he noticed he's looking at the woman, and then he's chanting some more, and then he looking at the woman, and he realized it was only a dream. That's true. A friend of mine told me, Prabhupada disciple. This was many years ago. So we just was trying to fill in the space here. Yeah.
Oh,
There's that chair right there for you.
okay.
Oh, that's my mic.
Where is
You got it patched.
The backpack, you know, 'cause I have my pad in there, which I can use. I have some cartridges in my bag too, when he brings it.
We did change, not that long, but we were changing for a while.
We were chanting for a little bit. Not Jared, okay. These are substandard mic stands. I have my there's nothing curlier than mic stands that don't work.
And the reason they don't is because people don't loosen it before moving it.
Yeah, that. Some of them are very fluid.
Little loose.
Yeah, not a little.
Yeah, yeah, it's not.
Jaya Radha Madhavam Kunja Bihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Jaya Radha Madhavam Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giribhardhari Jai Gopi Janabalabha Giribhardhari Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachahari Yamuna Tira Vanachahari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Do Tarasata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grunter Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Sambheda Bhakti Vrinda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. I'm going to take this jacket off, so I'm going to redo the... Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om 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 Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakhaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I thought today that I would read from a verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's 1:3. Let's see here. Okay, 1:3:33. That's what I'm. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy that you all decided to try to come and learn something about spiritual life, about Krishna consciousness. This is, of course, a reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, which has 18,000 verses, and this is the first canto, the third chapter, verse 33, which has a lot of basic information so that people can get a basic sense of what spiritual life is about. And as you read further into Srimad Bhagavatam, that gets expressed more and more clearly, with more detail. Yatre me sadhu sadhu rupe pratisiddhe svasamvida avidyayatmani krite iti tad brahma darshanam. So the translation reads, whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. So I'll reread that. Whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. So here's Prabhupada's purport. The difference between self-realization and material illusion is to know that the temporary or illusory impositions of material energy in the shape of gross and subtle bodies are superficial coverings for the self. The coverings take place due to ignorance. Such coverings are never effective in the person of this Supreme Personality of Godhead. Knowing this convincingly is called liberation, or seeing the Absolute. This means that perfect self-realization is made possible by adoption of godly or spiritual life. Self-realization means becoming indifferent to the needs of the gross and subtle bodies and become serious about activities of the self. The impetus for activities is generated from the self, but such activities become illusory due to ignorance of the real position of the self. By ignorance, the self-interest is calculated in terms of gross and subtle bodies, and therefore a whole set of activities is spoiled life after life. When, however, one meets the self by proper culture, the activities of the self begin. Therefore, a man who is engaged in activities of the self is called Jivan Mukta, or a liberated person, even in conditional existence. This perfect state of self-realization is attained not by artificial means, but under the lotus feet of the Lord, who is always transcendental. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he is present in everyone's heart, and for him only all knowledge, remembrance, or forgetfulness take place. When the living entity desires to be enjoyer of material energy, illusory phenomenon, the Lord covers the living being in the mystery of forgetfulness. Thus the living being misinterprets the gross body and subtle mind to be his own self. And by culture of transcendental knowledge, when the living being prays to the Lord for deliverance from the clutches of forgetfulness, the Lord, by his causeless mercy, removes the living being's illusory curtain. Thus he realizes his own self. He then engages himself in the service of the Lord in his eternal constitutional position, becoming liberated from conditioned life. All this is executed by the Lord either through his external potency or directly by the internal potency. Again, the verse. Whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both the gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. So, this verse is a good verse to kind of get an overview of what spiritual life is actually about. Oh no, come on. What is spiritual life when we actually talk about it? Mostly, all over the world, when people speak about religion or spiritual life, mostly what they have in mind is some various rituals that we perform, not more often than once a week, the very extreme. And after performing some rituals, which we may do in, say, Jewish or Arabic or English language, then we hope that the Supreme is pleased and that we will then receive certain blessings. And all over the world, 99% of what passes as religion basically follows this pro forma. This is a kind of template. We perform some ritual. We go to the church, mosque, temple, synagogue. And by going there, after we perform the ritual, we expect that when we come home, we will be given some blessings from above. And this is our sense of relationship with God. And of course, most religions teach that if one gets these kind of blessings by performing these rituals very regularly, but not more than once a week, then we will certainly, at the time of leaving our body, be elevated to that place which most religions call heaven. And there we will enjoy, just like we're enjoying here, but probably with some extra pizzazz in the enjoyment. And this is kind of the notion of religion for most people. But this kind of religion is very weak-kneed. There's not really a very deep feeling in this type of religion. And we can ask, well, what is the problem here? What is the fault of this kind of religious view? And the simple answer is that where is God in this picture? We perform some ritual, and when we perform this ritual, God gives us His blessings, and then we enjoy our lives. But what is our relationship with God in this kind of picture? God is some kind of mail order catalog, something like Sears and Roebuck. We have our, desires, and we submit those desires by God, and then He, because we've been properly executing our rituals, He goes in the back room and He pushes some buttons and dials, and the desire that we have, ticked on our order catalog comes down the pipeline, and pretty soon it becomes manifest in our lives. So our relationship with God is kind of like our relationship with an uncle or a great-grandfather that we see, once every while. Hi, great-grandfather, you are wonderful, and when will you be coming back again? Oh, next year? Okay. It's very distant, because God is our order supplier, and when we perform our activities for God, we are performing them not to please God per se. We're pleasing Him, all right, but the real purport, or the real bottom line of why we're performing them, is to get God to please us, which we know that we can only do if we please Him. So it's a mutual reciprocation kind of arrangement, a business deal. We're doing something for God, and then God will do something for us. And as far as the world goes, mostly this is what gets passed off as religion. But when we look at this more deeply, we'll begin to see this is pretty shallow. This doesn't give us much of a real relationship with God. And it doesn't really require a lot of us. You know, we have given our few paisa in the hundi, you know, and then we expect that now God will, behind the scenes, like the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, you know, create some magic that will help our lives go smoothly. And although for most people who are religious people, they never stop to question this template or this mold. I do my ritual, you know, I bring my flowers or bananas or incense, or I come to the mosque or church or synagogue and we bow down or offer prayers, or we go through some liturgy where we recite a certain collection of things. But in the long run, we're hoping that the Supreme will then say, okay, thank you for your 2 hours or hour or 3 hours of ritual. We'll see you again in a couple of months, and I will give you what you want. But we ask again, what is our relationship with God? He's the order supplier, and as order supplier, he plays more or less an incidental role in our lives. He's just the one who we think of, who we do our business deal with, you know, like a travel agent or something like that. We get on the phone and you want to know where you're going to go. Of course, I think people don't use travel agents anymore. Everybody does the thing on the internet now where you go to Orbitz or Travelocity or something like that, and the flights or whatever appear there. But at any rate, for those of us who are old enough to remember travel agents, when you go to a travel agent, you tell them where you want to go, and they try to find some good fare and telephone you back with the best fare possible. And then you go on your trip, and your relationship or your interaction with the travel agent is very brief, really. So people are under the impression that God wants us to enjoy here in the material world, and he created this world for us to find our own sense of how to enjoy. And then once we discover what it is that we want to enjoy, then if we do these rituals properly, we will certainly be able to achieve that particular type of enjoyment. So this is, unfortunately, the picture of religion in the world. But the Srimad Bhagavatam paints a very different picture. And that picture talks about having not an incidental, like travel agent relationship with the Supreme Lord, but it talks about having a 24/7 relationship with the Supreme Lord. Now, if you're going to have that kind of relationship with the Supreme Lord, then obviously the nature of that relationship has to be very different than the relationship we were just talking about. The grandfather, the uncle that we see once or twice a year, or the travel agent that we talk to just before we go on a trip, and then once we get into things, we never really communicate with them again. This verse, it talked about the idea of gross and subtle coverings. This is why the knowledge of the Vedas is very different than the knowledge we usually hear in most religious circles. What religion talks about the gross and subtle coverings and reminds us that this body is not us? There are no religions that talk about this as far as I understand. I remember growing up, of course, I didn't come from a family of Vaishnavas. I came from a family of Christians. And my parents were certainly very pious. They thought about God. But we could see that God was a minor player in the world. Of course, people say, no, I'm doing all kinds of positive things. I always think about God. But really, this is mostly just imagination. To think about God every once in a while, like during Christmas or during Hanukkah or Eid or one of these kind of celebrations that many religions have, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, is nice. Of course, it's certainly spiritual. But again, what strikes us most is the fact that it is leaving so much out, and that our relationship with God is really tangential. It's really distant. He is someone who creates the magic for us to enjoy things the way we think we want to enjoy them. He's the one who does the magic that allows us to enjoy the life that we have thought in our mind we want to enjoy. Whether it's here on this earth, or if we live a life of virtue, then we go to heaven, we can do it there. But either place, either here on the earth or in heaven, God is the person who does the magic that allows us to enjoy life the way we think we want to enjoy it. So, when one, as it says here, experiences self-realization, Prabhupada uses the term jivan mukta, or liberated jiva. We are a soul, liberated jiva. When the soul is liberated, the jiva is liberated, then he experiences that both the gross and subtle selves have nothing to do with the real self. What can that statement possibly mean? We see that we're in a body right now, this thing. If somebody sticks us with a nail or a pin, we scream. And this body is made out of, blood, bone, flesh, and so many other things. But are we this body? The Vedas say no. We are in the body, but we are not the body. We are in the body, but we are not the body. Well, in what way are we in the body? And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the Vedas give us some actual information, and other religions hem and haw and talk in very nebulous terms. You ask most people who believe in various other religions, what is the relationship between the self and the body? They will give various and sundry answers, but those answers will not be very easy to defend philosophically, because they're full of misconceptions. We say that we're in the body, but we are not the body. But it turns out we're not in just one body. We're in 2 bodies. There is a gross and subtle body. A gross and a subtle body. The gross body is this thing, the thing that we actually look and see when we turn the television camera on. Television camera captures an image of the gross body. But besides that gross body, there is another body within the gross body, and that body is called the subtle body. Both are material. So the gross body, as we hear, is made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So the gross body is made of the elements of this world. You know, the scientists would say mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, some other trace elements, you know, some sulfur, some magnesium, and various other phosphorus and other kinds of atoms. And these make various compounds that make up the body. And these can be seen with a television camera, can be investigated during a surgery, they can be analyzed under a microscope, they can be chemically separated and analyzed as well. So this is the gross body. And those who are materialists will say that this is all there is. Because certainly we see this thing and we can study it, and there's nothing very mysterious about it in one sense. But beyond this gross body, which in Sanskrit is called the Sthula Sharira, there's another body which we call the Linga Sharira, which is also material, but is not made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's made of mind, intelligence, and ego, or what I should say is false mind, false intelligence, and false ego. So at the time of death, the subtle body, or the Linga Sharira, it separates from the gross body. It separates. So this subtle body leaves the gross body behind. And at the time of death, once it leaves it behind, it never comes back. And therefore, the gross body, now bereft of the driving energy of the subtle body, immediately begins a different set of chemical reactions. We can see from a medical point of view that when the subtle body leaves the gross body, immediately a whole group of very physically tangible changes occur. The immune system stops fighting off various bacteria and viruses and other kinds of invaders. The immune system stops, the breathing system stops, the circulatory system stops, the digestion stops, the growth stops. All these myriad of very complicated chemical transformations stop. And they stop when the subtle body separates from the gross body. We call this death. And no matter what kind of chemical activity you do to the gross body, you cannot get that body to jumpstart and go back again if the subtle body leaves. Of course, there are episodes where the subtle body almost leaves and then it comes back. That's a different thing. But when the subtle body leaves for good, the entire mechanism immediately goes through these very, very palpable, very, very tangible changes. No breathing, no heartbeat, no electrical activity in the brain, digestion stops, the immune system stops, and immediately the body begins to disintegrate. Before that, the human body was jumping through hoops, flaming hoops backwards, violating all the principles of physical chemistry. It was doing this second by second. Various energies were combating the forces of the outside world to get the body to stop working and to disintegrate. The immune system was fighting off things. The digestion was working so there would be sufficient energy for the various activities of the body to go on. There was electrical activity in the brain. There was a heartbeat that kept pumping blood so that new oxygen-rich blood would come into contact with cells that were in desperate need of oxygen. All these things were going on. The Krebs cycle was going on, where various molecules were being assembled, ADP into ATP, so that the cells could burn this compound and use it for various functions that the cells do. All this is like watching Barnum and Bailey circus with elephants standing on their back legs and dogs jumping backwards and tigers jumping through flaming hoops. All this makes no sense. All this is contrary to the nature that we know. And if one studies physical chemistry in college, one will see that the way physical substances work, they don't do these things. We don't see these things happening outside of living beings. In living beings, we see this bizarre chemistry. And the minute that the subtle body leaves the living being, then all these things stop. So the gross body is not us. And surprisingly, the subtle body is not us either. But the subtle body is made in a very different way than the gross body. So the gross body is, as we just said, made of this chemistry, and it does these things that doctors have to understand. But the subtle body nobody knows about. Not in Western medicine, not in Western philosophy, and certainly not in Western religion. So in our Western philosophy and our Western religious point of view, these are unknown technologies. But when somebody actually explains these technologies, then immediately we see that we're dealing with something at a level of sophistication that we have not ever come in contact with. So when I was a young boy growing up, I knew that most of the people that I was living with, they liked or they professed to have an allegiance to God. But when you asked them any specific questions about how this world worked or what God was, mostly you would get very, very weak and approximate knowledge, and nothing at all definite. And at the same time, those people who profess to have a connection with God, their time spent in some kind of activity directly related to the Supreme was minimal at best, like the uncle or great-grandfather that visits once a year, or maybe even fewer in frequency, or the travel agent that we come to every once in a while when we need to go to some particular place. So let's talk about now this subtle body. How does it work? Is it made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether? And the answer is no. Is it made of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, potassium, sulfur, carbon, and all these elements? The answer again is no. What is it made of? And we find that it's made out of false mind, false intelligence, and false ego. And these are still material elements. They are not spiritual. They are material elements. But they are much more subtle than the gross elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And that's why the scientists generally have no understanding of these elements. And so at the time of death, this subtle body, this linga sharira of false mind, false intelligence, and false ego separates from the gross body made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And when it does, the material elements of the great universe around us once again embraces and reintegrates those elements that were at one time a part of this body. So in India, when there is death, the body is taken to the burning ghat, and usually the body is cremated. Other countries, the body is buried. And of course we know that as time goes on, opportunistic bacteria come invade the body, and after some time the body breaks down. Eventually there's nothing left but the bones, and even after a while the bones start to disintegrate as well. So the body is being reintegrated back into the warehouse, the reservoir of all material elements. So the carbon is being reintegrated into the universe of carbon, the oxygen is being reintegrated in the universe of oxygen. The various structures of the cells and of the organelles and the organs of the body are disintegrating, and eventually they become just a smelly mess, and eventually they don't even smell. They just become once again the elements that we see around us. They get integrated into the dirt or whatever. But the subtle body is left behind. And this is what really interests us. What is this subtle body, and what happens to it after death? The subtle body is made of mind, intelligence, and ego, or we should say false mind, false intelligence, and false ego. We also have a true mind, a true intelligence, and a true ego. But those are not a part of this subtle body. Those are a part of the soul proper. The soul proper is not even the subtle body. The soul proper exists beyond the subtle body. But now, to understand what's really happening in this world, we have to understand the distinction between the soul and the subtle body, because those two things are not the same. Not only are we not the gross body, we are not the subtle body either. So the subtle body is false mind, false intelligence, and false ego. And at the time of death, this subtle body is what is the vehicle which carries the soul to yet another body somewhere in the material universe because of our past life and the karma that we have performed during one life. We are put into a new body. Karmana deve netrena jantur deho papataye striyo pravishta udaram pum samreta kanashraya. So that's in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto. Karmana deve netrena jantur deho papataye striyo pravishta udaram pum samreta kanashraya. That according to the karma and the divine arrangement, the living entity is put into the womb of a woman with a particle of male semina, and according to the karma of that particular living entity, then he takes a particular body, not a random body, but a particular kind of gross body. So we talked about how the gross body disintegrates when there is death. When there is birth, a new gross body is being assembled, just like at death a body is being disassembled. At birth, a new gross body is being assembled in a particular womb. It may be a human womb. It may be an animal womb. It may be even one of the processes where an insect goes from some kind of staging, from egg to pupa to larva, etc., and finally becomes a fully mature insect of some kind or another. So it may be one of those kind of situations. In this way, the material energy is organizing itself to become a platform for this new subtle body which has just left another gross body somewhere else at some other time. And now this new gross body is ready to accept this subtle body that's coming from afar and become the new platform for that subtle body to reintegrate with a new gross body and live another term of existence in this material world. And we call this whole business of going from body to body, we call this business reincarnation, or in Sanskrit technically samsara, the process of migrating from one body to another body to another body to another body. There's nothing random about it. It's very scientific. We don't get a random body, we get a particular body. And the reason we get the bodies that we get is because of the nature of the karma we performed previously. If we performed very sinful actions, we will probably not get a very good body. And so in the Vedas we are informed that there are 8,400,000 species of existence. 400,000 of those are humanoid, and the rest are not. The rest are birds and beasts and aquatics and plants and microbes and other things. These also have subtle bodies. And when the living entity has misused the opportunity afforded in a human body, then one is denigrated to one of these lower forms. And in the lower forms, one can no longer perform bad karma. One can no longer act against the will of the Lord. Rather, one is only burning off the bad karma of a previous lifetime. So as we burn off the bad karma of a previous lifetime, we are automatically elevated life after life to a higher form of life, to a higher form of life, to a higher form of life, till finally we come back to the human form of life. And in the human form of life, there we once again have the ability to make conscious decisions to either purify ourselves or contaminate ourselves by making no effort to understand the nature of life. So we have a gross and we have a subtle body. This subtle body is the repository of our selected form of material ambition. Each person who comes to the material world becomes infatuated with a particular kind of material enjoyment. Not a random kind, a particular kind. And we choose it. We decide, this is what life's about to me. And this is what I'm going to go for. This is my dream. This is what I'm focused on. And for some, it may be to become a political, heavyweight, someone who can order others around. For others, it may be to make their mark on the world by some Olympic feat, that I'm the fastest runner, the highest jumper, the most skillful wrestler. For others, it may be, I want to make my mark on the world by being somehow intellectually amazing, to write some new theory, to make a breakthrough in quantum physics, to come up with a new proof in mathematics for some theorem that has yet to be proven, to design some new political theorem of how nations or economic organizations can come together and produce a proper result. It may be that one simply wants to have a nice family. It may be that one's material ambition is simply to have a lot of sex partners. It may be that one's material ambition may be to just become famous and become one of those people that the tabloids write about. That may be what actually they think of as their ambition. And within the heart of the living entity, this cherished ambition drives that living being from life to life to life. And so we strive for this goal in one life. We may achieve it, or we may not have such good karma and we do not achieve it. We fail to achieve it. But when we come back in the next lifetime, we again take up that same quest to achieve this particular ambition. So life after life, we're following this ambition. Although, generally speaking, at the time of death, we forget what we were, our ambition was in the previous lifetime. When we come, usually around the age of puberty, sometimes before, the supersoul in the heart reminds us of what it was we were chasing in our previous life, and suddenly the living entity changes and begins to think, yeah, I want to join the army, or I want to climb up on buildings and take selfies of myself as I'm dangling from the 90th floor of some high-rise in downtown Moscow, or I want to, practice my guitar 7 hours a day and then join a rock band, or I'm going to play basketball and I'm going to play as much as I can, and I'm going to be one of those great ball players. So the living entity suddenly awakens to that dream that they've carried around from lifetime after lifetime, and they begin to immediately, instinctively do whatever it takes to focus in on that dream. But of course, nobody ever tells you that these dreams are all material. And even if you achieve them, you will never be satisfied by that achievement. And if you don't achieve it, then you'll go to your grave disappointed and with a sense of failure, only to be born again to chase that same dream all over again in another body. Of course, that's assuming it's a human body. You can't chase those kind of dreams in animal bodies. In animal bodies, your whole life is about subsistence and not being eaten by something. So that's your whole life as an animal. So you don't get that opportunity in an animal life. You have to wait again until you come back to the human form of life. This is the cycle called samsara. This is what there's no information about in modern philosophy, in modern religions. And people will say, oh, but this is all mythology of some ancient books in India somewhere. We don't have any proof of any of this stuff. But there is proof. But most people will not accept it, because most people have a very committed intention to remain in this process of chasing this material dream, life after life after life after life. So if there is no subtle body, why is it then that sometimes during a cardiac arrest in a hospital, the patient, who technically should be completely unconscious, has a vision suddenly of seeing their own body from outside of it and seeing the medics performing these emergency operations on the body that they generally are inside? What makes that possible? Western medical science can't answer that, and modern Western philosophy has no explanation for it either, and neither does modern Western religion. These different societies, they have no explanation for this. But it happens quite often. It's not a one-off thing. It happens a lot. Similarly, during some kind of medical emergency, when someone is in an automobile crash, or sometimes there is some other kind of sudden and catastrophic event that happens to the body, we get these, what are called in our modern world, OBEs, out-of-the-body experiences. So if we are the body, how can you be out of it? There must be something else that pops out of the body. So that something else is the subtle body. The subtle body pops out of the gross body, and then if the conditions are not right for final death, then once again it reunites with the gross body and settles itself back down again in the heart, and once again becomes reintegrated with the gross body. So this is something that's not just fantasy. It happens quite often. But of course, those who are diehard materialists, those who are diehard atheists, will just write it off as saying, oh, this is anecdotal, meaning that it's just something that people say, you know. But why are so many people saying it? If it's anecdotal, then there's some kind of phenomenon going on with this. And not only that, but researchers who have gone and investigated this phenomenon, like Dr. Sabin, has asked these patients who claim to have seen what's going on during a heart attack procedure. He asks them, what were the doctors doing? And the person who was had this experience of being outside the body explains what he saw the medical staff doing. Now, if you're not a medical practitioner of some kind, a doctor or a nurse or something like that, you would have no idea of what it is that medical people do in a cardiac emergency. You'd have absolutely no idea. And what you said would be more or less easily disprovable. But these people who are just like you and me are not medically trained. When they describe what they saw the medics doing is actually the procedures the medics go through. How would they come to this information? During a cardiac arrest, there is no blood flow through the body. So therefore, there is no electrical activity in the mind or the brain. So if there's no electrical activity in the brain, one is essentially blacked out. So how can they not only be not blacked out, but actually perceiving details of a procedure being carried out? Of course, it's easy just to write these things off. And this is exactly how totally materialistic people view things. They need to debunk these things simply by writing them off out of hand. They don't explain them. They claim that, oh, it's just some person having some imagination. But why is that imagination accurate? So there is some physical evidence that this thing that we call reincarnation is actually happening. And sometimes we have the stories of children who remember their past lives. This doesn't happen often, but it does happen. children remembering what they were in their past life. Now, of course, anyone can say they remember a past life, and we know children make up stories. But on the same token, can they make up stories that hold up historically and plausibly? So there was a researcher in the University of Virginia named Dr. Ian Stevenson, who documented thousands of cases of children remembering their past life. And then he would go through the research of following up, if these children say this and this and this and this about their past life, was there such a person? Were the historical elements of that person's life verifiable in some kind of historical record? And then he would go search down that historical record, and often he would find that the children, their stories were not only plausible, but they indeed did match with an actual living person who existed sometime in the past. And since, this was before the age of the internet, how would these children come by this information? Any child can make up a story, but can a child make up a plausible story, much less a story that's historically sound? It can be corroborated. So again, Vedic literature tells us this, that there's a gross and subtle body. Now, what Prabhupada's telling us in his purport is that when we finally come to the understanding that we are not this body, the gross body, and we are not the subtle body either, we are not the gross body, we're not the subtle body, then one actually sees himself as well as the Lord. Then at that point we have cut away the misunderstandings that are a part of our consciousness due to identifying with the gross body, and we've cut away the misunderstandings that are due to our identification with the subtle body. But the only way to cut away the misidentification with the subtle body is to actually understand what the soul is. The soul is servant of Krishna. The soul is servant of God. That's what it is. That's what it'll always be. It will never change from that. And when we are serving Krishna, we are performing the activity that the soul is fundamentally destined to do. If we're not doing that, then we are living in some kind of half illusion, identifying with either the gross or subtle bodies, usually both. So these material dreams that we cook up, these material dreams have our own happiness at their core, and we are married to them. We are committed to them. And as long as we are, we will also be in turn committed to the cycle of reincarnation, because we will either achieve our material goal in this lifetime or not, depending on our karma. If we do achieve it, we will see that it's hollow. It never really satisfies us. And we will cook up another material desire and chase that one. If we don't achieve it, we'll feel the sense of lack of fulfillment. And in our next lifetime, we will again try for the same material achievement. So this is how we identify with the gross and subtle bodies. The subtle bodies give us our dream, our karma, our identification, which makes the continuum for one body to another body to another body to another body. The spiritual life is the gradual awakening to this idea that if we waste our time going from life to life to life, chasing these material dreams, then we have not really gotten to the bottom line of why we're alive, or what humans are, or what our original or actual purpose is. So when we realize that, at that point, we actually realize not only who we really are, but we begin to see the Supreme Lord, and not before. So this is what this verse is saying. I'm sorry I had to speak a little bit of a larger chunk than I really wanted to. I wanted to break for some, back and forth. But I wanted to kind of get the whole picture out there. So this verse is talking about whenever a person experiences by self-realization that both gross and subtle bodies have nothing to do with the pure self, at that time he sees himself as well as the Lord. What's the alternative to this? We are identifying with the gross and subtle bodies, and we are not interested in seeing the Lord, and therefore we are chasing some material dream, life after life. That's the alternative. So, questions, comments, whatever? Anybody have any interest or want to know some details about any of these things? Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for giving this lecture. It's very informative. Last week I was seeing so many videos on there and process of this one and
You were hearing videos on what?
on death.
Death.
How Indian mystics are explaining the death.
Uh-huh.
And whatever you said perfectly aligns with what I have seen. But one place, one area which I'm still not clear is when the body, when the subtle body leaves and goes to the another body.
Uh-huh.
In all our childhood, like the way we were grown is like when you do bad deeds, you go to like hell, and
Right.
when you do good things, you go to the heaven. So where is this going to heaven or hell comes into picture before the subtle body goes to the another life?
Right. It's a complex situation. That in the process of samsara, sometimes we just focus on going from one body to another body, but in between going from one body to another, there's a whole bunch of interim stuff that happens. And sometimes that can take place over a long duration. So depending on the nature of one's life, in other words, depending on the nature of one's karma, there is a proper use of a human body. Like it or not, I didn't write the book on what's the proper use of a human body. The Supreme Lord did. So we can pay attention to it or we can ignore it. It's up to you. You have the free will to pay attention to what it is that the human body should be used for, or you can just ignore or not bother to learn what it is. And if you don't bother, most likely you will not use the human body for the things it was designed for, and therefore you will rack up bad karma, what we call vikarma in Sanskrit. And when you do, at the time of death, a whole chain of things will happen to you. The first of which is that you will be ripped out of your gross body at the time of death by a group of agents known as the Yamadutas, and you will be brought to judgment before Yamaraj, who resides in the hellish worlds in Narakaloka. And he decides the severity of your misuse, and if it's not so severe, you may be granted another human body. If it's more severe, you may have to go to a lower body. If it's really severe, you may have to go through hell for some time. And there are 28 hells mentioned. And there are specific hells for specific types of infractions. And then you suffer those. And although you are suffering them not in the usual gross body that we talk about, you don't have a gross body now, you have a subtle body, but you're given a special version of a subtle body that can suffer and at the same time not be destroyed. Because the sufferings in the hellish region are very intense. And normally, if we had a gross body, we would not be able to endure those sufferings. The gross body would just be destroyed. But the subtle body can endure those sufferings and not be destroyed, and therefore a person can suffer greatly in the hellish worlds. And this, of course, burns off enormous amounts of bad karma. Of course, in the Vedic situation, in our Vedic understanding, we understand the hell is not eternal, it's temporary. So you go through your period of suffering, and then you go to another human body, or some other kind of body, probably. So once you undergo the perdition, according to your severe misuse of a human form, once you go through that, then you are once again placed in another body somewhere else to continue the cycle of birth and death. Now, occasionally, there's another kind of thing that happens. When a person commits suicide, or when they die suddenly and violently, sometimes a person becomes a ghost for a while. Now, that is a subtle body with no gross body. That's what a ghost is. It's a subtle body. And often, because a person's so much identified with their gross body, that the subtle body still retains the form, at least visually, of the previous gross body. That's why ghosts of people somewhat look like the people that they were once, the body that they once inhabited. So during this time, when one is a ghost, then one is kind of on hold in the process of samsara. And that's a very difficult situation. And there are things that eventually mitigate their situation, and they do move on in the cycle of reincarnation. But one may remain a ghost for a long time. So again, people will say, well, this is just some kind of nonsense from an ancient mythology. But again, all over the world, people experience ghosts. What are they? Again, medical science has no explanation for them. Material atheistic science has no explanation for them. But the Vedic literatures do have an explanation for them. They are a subtle body with no gross body. And at a certain point, then the ghost is moved on and becomes once again united with another gross body and continues in the cycle of reincarnation. But it may be a long time. Now, there's another option too, and that's when someone has paid specific attention to the karma kanda section of Vedic knowledge and performed pious activity, also known as punya, and done it in a very systematic way. One may be elevated to the heavenly planets. And this heavenly planetary situation is what the other religions of the world call heaven. But it's also a temporary place, just like hell is a temporary place. So the heavenly planetary regions, one is gifted with a better body than the one we have here as humans. A body that lasts for thousands and thousands of years, a body that does not have defects the way that these bodies do, and a body that has powers and abilities far beyond what we have in the present form. And of course, again, one uses up these pious credits that one specifically aimed for in a previous lifetime, and then at some point in the future drops back down again to this earth middle plane. So all these situations are temporary. Heaven, hell, the material world in the earthly plane. The only situation that's not temporary is going back to the spiritual realm, which is outside of the material world altogether. And there we are fully embracing the 24/7 idea of serving the Supreme. And the service of the Supreme is not superficial, redundant, or boring. It's nothing like that. It's amazing, always changing, and it comes in a number of different flavors depending on the type of relationship. But in the spiritual world, we worship the Supreme through various kinds of relationships. And that can go on forever, because there's no need for that to change. But in the spiritual world, we do not have gross or subtle bodies. We only have our true spiritual self. which then sees the Supreme and sees itself, and the relationship with the Supreme is constant interaction. So that's the overall picture. Other questions? Yeah.
Like when a person is under coma,
Right.
what is the process which goes on with the subtle body? Like when he leaves the body that time, like he died.
Right.
He was there in the coma. So how?
Well, a coma usually shows some kind of unusual situation that's going on. It could be bad karma, could be something else. In the Vedas, we hear that there are 4 states of consciousness: Jagaranam, Shushupti, and Swapna. And there's a 4th one called Turiya. So Jagaranam is our regular consciousness, our everyday waking consciousness. Swapna is sleeping consciousness, where we're conscious but not of our body. We're conscious of a dream world where we exist. That's called Swapna. Shushupti is unconsciousness, where we're kind of completely blanked out, no consciousness. And that's similar to the consciousness of coma. Now, Turiya, the 4th state of consciousness, is the consciousness of divine supreme being. So that's the Jivan Mukta consciousness we were just referring to here, where someone actually, even in this lifetime, is understanding and experiencing their direct relationship with the Supreme Lord. So in unconsciousness, or Shushupti, one is unaware of the passage of time at all. And so sometimes this happens for a number of reasons, but in principle we can talk about what happens at the time of death, but to discuss a particular case involves a lot of details. And as you can see, just as if you went to the court system of any municipality and you watched the kind of cases that come up, you would see there's a lot of details and a lot of back and forth and this and that. The same thing is going on in a larger scale with the universal system. That sometimes a person's future is being adjudicated, sometimes a person's future is on hold for a time, sometimes there's a particular karma that causes a person to go through that kind of an episode. A number of things can be happening. And then after the coma, then one may die or one may come out of the coma, depending on, again, the karma. And that's how I would explain that. Yes?
Actually, I was reading the Bhagavatam and the Mahabharata, and
Uh-huh.
over there they speak of different kinds of beings with a subtle body. Like they refer once to the beings of subtle body as bhutas.
Right.
Somewhere they refer to them as pishachas, sometimes as daityas and danavas. What is the difference between all of these?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We just mentioned earlier that there are 8,400,000 species. So actually it's interesting that the scientists say something similar to this. They say somewhere from 6 to 10 million kind. So depends on who you're talking to. I have no idea whether what the scientists consider a species is similar to what the Vedas consider a species. Probably not. But at any rate, it's interesting that the figure is somewhat in the same ballpark, you know. But 400,000 of those are humanoid. And by humanoid, I mean basically looking like we do, bipedal, you know, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a head, you know, etc. And of these 400,000 species, some are higher than humans. And of course some are lower than humans. And again, that's based on karmic categorization. So according to one's karma, one may be pigeonholed into a particular kind of humanoid category. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam as well as in the Mahabharata, it describes these various groups, the Pishachas, the Bhutas, the Pretas. Those are lower, very karmically bad, karmically humanoid life bodily forms. And then there are those who are on the other side of the coin, like the Devas and the Upadevas and the Vidyadharas and the, Charanas and these various other types, the Siddhas. They have bodies that are better than ours because they have good karma. So it's an entire zoo. And if you look at the Vedic literatures, you'll see that there's all these different life forms listed. Some are diminutive, some are unfortunate, some are greatly advanced, some are larger, some are gifted with the ability to control aspects of the material world that we live in, because that's what the Devas are actually about. They are the administrators of the material universe. They control various features of the universe that we live in, and therefore they have specific powers for a specific element of the material universe. Of course, the Supreme Lord could do this all automatically, but he doesn't, because he gives them this chance to be administrators. And therefore the material universe is not just operating according to blind scientific law, but the material universe is operating according to there are certain law-oriented aspects of the material universe, but it's also controlled by people. And that's why some peculiar things happen as well. Just as in any city government, we have a city hall. And we have various cabinet roles where people perform some function in a city government or a state government or a national government. And they have duties, and according to those duties, things may change in our external world because they're in charge of them. They have powers to it. So there is certainly a mechanical aspect of the universe that we live in, but there's also a conscious directed version of it, which is not the supreme consciousness per se, but it is the particular consciousness of one of the devas who has charge over a particular element in our world that we live. That answer your question?
There is one online question.
Okay.
It says that you spoke about pure intelligence, pure ego and pure mind, then false intelligence. So the Prabhuji is asking for is it any reference to the Bhagavatam, like any chapter this is explained, he wants to know.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out where that particular element is most easily referenced. I might have to defer the answer to that to a later time, but basically we understand that the essence of spiritual life or Krishna consciousness is that when we identify as servant of Krishna and we act in that capacity, then we are acting in our true mind. And our ego is correct. Ego in Latin means I am. What am I? If we think I am a being that has a material desire, then that's false ego. If we think I'm servant of Krishna, then that's true ego. So it's as simple as that. When we act in harmony with the conception that we are truly servant of Krishna, then that's true ego. When the mind identifies with the body, when the mind identifies with material ambitions, then that mind is polluted. And that's false mind, when the mind identifies with being a servant of Krishna and being a true self outside of the body and outside of the subtle body, then that's true mind. And similarly, the intelligence, when it's focused on how to arrange for material happiness, then that intelligence is false intelligence. When the intelligence is focused on how to please the Supreme Lord, then that intelligence is true intelligence. So it's for us to enjoy in the material world, Krishna has to bow out of the picture. So in the material world, it is here precisely because we do not want a full-on 24/7 relationship with God. So he says, all right, I'm not going to force anyone to have a full-on 24/7 relationship with me. If you don't want that, you wake up here. This is it. This is what the place is designed to do. And so, although Krishna is everywhere, in everything, it appears that he's nowhere. It appears that he's in nothing. You know, if you walk down the street, you ask somebody about Krishna, a random person on the street, they'll look at you with a blank expression, you know, because the material world is designed to hide Krishna. It's not an accident that it hides Krishna. It's designed to do that. So until we recognize our fault in wanting to remove ourselves from relationship with Krishna, then we can stay here. And we can go life after life and go through the various crumbs of pleasure that we get in the material world and the buckets of suffering that we have to go through here. Or we can recognize our mistake and try to change that. And when we try to awaken our consciousness of Krishna, we begin to see through the veil of the material illusion, you know. The mystery of the material world begins to lift, the fog begins to go away. So that's how spiritual life works. So I don't want to put everybody to sleep. So maybe I should end here unless somebody has a burning question that they want to put forward. What else happens after this purity? Anything? Or do we just do another kirtan? Or we go home? Or the dancing girls come out? Or fireworks? Or what?
We go home and then eat. And I don't know what they're going to do, but besides eat.
Yeah, we have prasadam. We'll have Ekadashi prasadam.
I see. I see. Okay.
His Holiness Chandrashekhar Maharaj.
Thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna.
I would like to just read 1 minute about Chandrashekhar Maharaj.